Beneath the heavy gray clouds of a winter morning in Redwood Bay, fine snowflakes drifted down, clinging to the wide glass windows of Harbor Street Café like a thin veil, blurring the scene inside. Warm yellow light from low-hanging lamps spilled out onto the street, mingling with the steam rising from cups of hot coffee cradled in customers' hands. It created a scene that was both cozy and distant warm for those inside, yet cold and unwelcoming to the man standing outside the door. Samuel Carter pulled the collar of his sweater higher, his hands stiff from the cold, yet his eyes remained fixed on the lively space beyond the frost-covered glass. At 52, with graying hair and a face etched with the marks of time and the business world, Samuel was no stranger to sights like this: bustling cafes, the steady flow of customers, the hum of espresso machines beating like the heart of the shop. But today, he wasn't here as the founder of the Harbor Street Cafe chain with 820 locations across the country. He was just a man in a worn sweater and a faded knit cap, hands in his pockets, walking in like any other customer. This was part of Operation True Brew, a secret survey Samuel had undertaken himself to feel the true pulse of the brand before signing off on a $260 million expansion into Europe. When the small bell over the door chimed to signal a new customer, none of the staff looked up. The cafe was in the height of its morning rush, every movement repeating like a machine that had run the same cycle thousands of times. Take orders, make drinks, process payments, hand over items, repeat. Samuel stood behind a well-dressed woman complaining on the phone about a delayed flight, and behind him, two college students whispered about whether to buy a breakfast sandwich or split a muffin to save money. He listened to these small, scattered conversations, storing them in his mind as pieces of a puzzle that revealed the reality of his customers' lives. When it was his turn, Samuel stepped up to the counter. A young woman with bright eyes and a kind smile, the name tag on her chest reading Emily, looked up and greeted him with a warmth that felt like a ray of sunshine cutting through the winter chill. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" Samuel cleared his throat and replied softly, "An egg sandwich, the $2 one." Emily's fingers moved quickly across the register, her smile never fading. "Would you like to add a coffee? We've got a breakfast combo." "No, thank you," he declined politely. But just as he spoke, Samuel caught sight of two other employees behind Emily exchanging a glance and smirking. Through the muffled buzz of the cafe, he heard the faint word cheapskate. And he acted as though he hadn't heard, took the receipt from Emily, and slowly made his way to a table near the fogged-up window. From there, Samuel could watch everything. The way employees spoke to each other, how they handled difficult customers, the fleeting expressions when a manager's name came up. In the small, worn notebook tucked into his coat pocket, he jotted down a few quick lines notes that, to a casual onlooker, might look like a to-do list, but were in fact live data for assessing the spirit of the entire operation. Emily brought out his egg sandwich with the same care one might give to the most expensive item on the menu. Samuel responded with a thank you and a warm look that made her pause in surprise when he addressed her by name. He ate slowly, his mind focused not on the food but on the vignettes unfolding around him. A young mother juggling two restless toddlers, calmed when Emily knelt to chat so she could pay in peace. A coworker disappearing for an extended break, only for Emily to quietly pick up the slack. An elderly man struggling to choose a drink, and Emily patiently explaining each option. Yet alongside these moments of warmth were other, less flattering images. The weary sigh of a tired employee, the break room door cracked open to reveal people standing to eat for lack of space, the subtle eye rolls when the work schedule was mentioned. Samuel wasn't just seeing numbers or reports, he was seeing the real people and how they existed within the machine he had built. The phone in his pocket buzzed a message from his assistant saying the board wanted preliminary approval for the expansion that very afternoon. Samuel smiled faintly. If they knew their CEO was sitting in one of their own cafes, eating a $2 egg sandwich in the corner and taking notes on staff morale, they probably wouldn't believe it. And then, just as he thought the morning's observation would end quietly, the cafe door swung open, letting in two figures carried by the bite of the winter wind. Their steps were deliberate, their eyes sweeping quickly across the room, and in an instant the atmosphere in the cafe began to change. Without anyone saying a word, it was as if an invisible switch had been flipped for every employee in the cafe. Movements that had been relaxed just moments earlier became tense and brisk, eyes tracking each step of the two people who had just entered. The woman in front appeared to be in her mid-40s, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a neat high bun. A perfectly tailored ash-gray suit hugged her tall, straight frame, each step measured as if precisely calculated. Her cold blue eyes swept over every corner of the cafe, and the slightest furrow of her brow was enough to make the air feel frozen. This was Victoria Hale, the regional director overseeing nearly 20 locations in the state, known for hitting every target and equally known for a level of toughness that bordered on severe. Right behind her was Derek Mills, the assistant director of operations, a broad-shouldered man with a slight paunch, the collar of his crisp white shirt cinched tight beneath a bright red tie. His smile came easily but never reached his eyes, and his voice always seemed pitched to dominate a room. Samuel recognized them instantly, but in his faded sweater and old knit cap, he was completely invisible to them. "Emily, where's your manager?" Victoria's voice cut through the low hum of conversation like a sharp blade. Emily froze for just a second as she was wiping down the espresso machine, then quickly answered, "Linda's in the back office, ma'am." "Should I get her for you?" "Do it now," Victoria replied without looking at her, her gaze still sweeping the cafe like an officer inspecting the barracks. Samuel noticed Emily's shoulders tense, her smile vanishing, while two other employees instantly moved with more urgency, as if a single glance from their superior could determine the fate of their day. Derek stepped up to the counter, his booming voice carrying to the farthest corners of the cafe. "We've got a potential investor coming in today to assess the space for expansion, so everything needs to be perfect. I want bigger smiles, faster service, and absolutely—" He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes landed on Samuel, a lone man at a small table with only a half-empty glass of water and a crumpled napkin in front of him. "And absolutely no undesirable images cluttering the customer experience," Derek said slowly, emphasizing each word. Samuel didn't react, only tilted his head slightly in observation. From behind the counter, Emily frowned faintly. About a minute later, Linda, the store manager, hurried out. She looked to be around 40, her brown hair pulled back hastily, her face carrying the weary imprint of long days. Samuel remembered her file well. 10 years with the company, steady performance, recently divorced and raising 2 young children. "We didn't schedule a visit," Victoria said coolly, "but unannounced inspections are the only way to see the truth." Her gaze shifted back to Samuel, this time with undisguised displeasure. "Linda, what's your policy on customers sitting for long periods with only a glass of water?" Linda glanced at Samuel, hesitating. "We usually let them stay as long as they're not causing trouble." "Look at him," Derek cut in, his tone dripping with mockery. "Half an hour with just water, taking up a seat during peak hours. That kind of customer drags the brand's value down." Samuel's expression remained calm, but inside, every word etched itself into his memory like dark ink on white paper. Victoria nodded in agreement. "According to our analysis, the mere presence of certain customer groups can lower revenue from our target demographic by up to 20%. Linda, you need to enforce faster table turnover. Water service should be for paying customers only, and consider playing classical music. It discourages lingering." Emily spoke up softly. "But he did buy a sandwich, ma'am, the $2 one." $2? Derek let out a short, derisive laugh. "Probably counted out the change before buying. This is exactly the kind of low-value customer that dilutes the brand image." A flash of red touched Emily's eyes, a mix of anger and shame on behalf of the older man being used as a negative example in front of everyone. But Linda gave her a quick, warning look. "Stay quiet if you want to keep your job." Victoria began tapping notes into her tablet, her voice as cold as ice. "Noted as a management failure. This will affect the branch's evaluation for expansion potential." Samuel sat still, his hand beneath the table, opening his notebook, quietly recording every word, every tone, every piece of evidence of the kind of culture he refused to see spread any further. As Victoria and Derek left the counter and made their way toward the kitchen for inspection, Samuel remained perfectly still, his eyes following their movements like a patient observer. Only when the click of Victoria's heels faded beyond the door did he quietly close his notebook, set it aside, and stand. He didn't leave the cafe. Instead, he walked slowly toward the counter, where Emily was carefully wiping away stray drops of coffee from the espresso machine. "Miss," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry over the hiss of steam, "may I ask you something?" Emily glanced up, hesitating. About what, sir?" Samuel smiled faintly, lowering his voice but keeping it loud enough for the management table to hear if they cared to listen. "I'm thinking about applying for a job here. Does the company offer health insurance to employees?" The question, seemingly harmless, made Emily's eyes widen slightly, as though she needed a few seconds to decide how to answer. "Well, some employees do." She didn't get to finish before the sound of a chair scraping sharply across the floor came from the corner. Victoria strode over quickly, the cold smile on her face arranged like a perfect mask. "Excuse me, I overheard your question. Health insurance is offered to all full-time employees who meet the requirements minimum 35 hours a week, 6 months of employment, and satisfactory performance reviews." Samuel nodded, as if mentally noting every condition. "So most employees here qualify, right?" Emily opened her mouth to answer, but Victoria cut in again, her voice still polite yet sharp as a blade. "Emily, go tidy up the storage room. I'll answer these questions." Emily's reluctant nod could not hide the disappointment in her eyes as she walked to the back. Samuel turned back to Victoria, continuing evenly, "I'm curious, how many hours a week do employees usually get?" "That depends on business needs and employee availability," Victoria replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. Derek, appearing seemingly out of nowhere, was now standing right behind her, tilting his head as he inserted himself into the conversation. "Why are you asking so many questions?" "I just want to know if it's a good place to work," Samuel answered calmly. "I've seen places that don't care about their staff, so I like to check first." "We treat our employees very well," Victoria interrupted, each word falling like a line from a PR handbook. Samuel tilted his head. "And do they get proper breaks between shifts? I imagine standing all day must be exhausting." Derek raised an eyebrow. "As required by state law, of course." Samuel repeated slowly. "As required by law, not because it's the right thing to do?" The sudden silence was palpable. A few employees pretended to busy themselves, but it was obvious they were listening. Victoria pressed her lips together while Derek stepped forward half a pace, using his physical presence like a form of pressure. "Buddy," his voice grew heavier, "this isn't some kind of social interview. If you're not buying anything, maybe you should move along." Samuel gave a small nod. "I was thinking about buying another pastry, but there's one more thing I'd like to know. Do managers get bonuses for keeping labor costs low?" This time, Victoria's composure faltered. This was a question only someone inside the system would know to ask. "Who are you?" she asked directly, her voice low but still carrying weight. Samuel shrugged. "Just someone who cares about the kind of company customers are supporting." "You're not a customer," Derek snapped. "You're a troublemaker. Get out." The air in the cafe froze. From behind the counter, Emily emerged, stepping close to Samuel to whisper, "You should go. They're really angry." Samuel turned to her, his gaze softening. "Thank you, Emily. You're very kind." Then he turned toward the door, but before pushing it open, he paused and glanced back. "Does the company have an ethics hotline?" The color drained from both Victoria's and Derek's faces. "Because I think," Samuel continued, "I might be needing it." And with that, he stepped outside, leaving behind a silent cafe and two managers completely unaware that they had just opened the door to the real storm to come. Samuel didn't leave the neighborhood. He circled around to the back, turned into a multi-level parking garage about 3 blocks from the cafe, and pulled into a secluded corner. In the enclosed space, with only the soft hum of the heater in the background, he opened his laptop and typed in a long password known to only a handful of people in the company. The screen lit up with Harbor Street Café's internal interface, the gateway to every monitoring system, data archive, and secure communication channel the corporation possessed. Instead of logging in under his CEO credentials, Samuel used a covert access route set up by the cybersecurity team, one that allowed him to join an online meeting without anyone recognizing his presence. In the corner of the screen, the meeting schedule flashed. Expansion Progress Report, 2:45 p.m. This was the very meeting in which Victoria and Derek would present their evaluation of store number 412, the location he had walked out of less than an hour earlier. His phone buzzed. A message from Patricia Lamb, board member, and the only person Samuel truly trusted, appeared. Something's off in Victoria's reports. Employees are saying something very different. You should know before you sign off. Samuel's lips curved into a faint smile. It was signals like these from Patricia over the past months that had pushed him to launch Operation True Brew. At exactly 2:45, the screen filled with the familiar faces of board members seated around a long, polished wooden table. Connecting in from Redwood Bay, Victoria and Derek appeared far more polished than they had that morning. Crisp suits, immaculate grooming, and professional smiles, their voices flowing smoothly as if rehearsed. "Good afternoon, everyone," Victoria began, her tone so soft it was hard to believe that earlier that day she had ordered a customer out of the store. "We've just completed our assessment of Harbor Street store number 412 and are pleased to report that everything is operating exceptionally well." Derek followed without hesitation. "Staff morale is excellent, customers are happy, and the workplace culture aligns perfectly with the brand." Samuel sat still, eyes fixed on the screen, flipping through his notebook to record each word verbatim, each lie. When Patricia asked about employee feedback, Victoria nodded with confidence. "We spoke with several team members, and all praised the benefits, flexible scheduling, and the support from management." Samuel knew she was referring to Emily, the very person Victoria had deliberately removed from the conversation to prevent her from telling the truth. When the CFO inquired about the customer base, Derek described them as exactly our target demographic professional, high income, loyal to the brand. Samuel's grip tightened around his pen. The memory of himself sitting with a glass of water in a worn sweater labeled as low value was still fresh and sharp. Asked about operational challenges, Victoria smiled. "Just a few minor issues, easily handled within our procedures. Staffing levels are sufficient, inventory is well managed, and the location is completely ready for expansion." It all sounded like a perfect picture, except Samuel knew that every stroke in that picture had been painted over with something false. The meeting closed with congratulations all around and unanimous agreement to move forward with the $260 million expansion plan. Samuel shut his laptop and leaned back in his seat. Inside him, a cold, steady resolve was taking shape. Tomorrow morning, he would no longer be the man in the worn sweater sitting quietly in the corner of a cafe. Tomorrow, he would walk into the boardroom in his best suit, under the stunned gaze of the entire board, and Victoria and Derek would learn exactly what it meant to face the truth. 6:30 the next morning, in the quiet hotel room overlooking the misty harbor of Redwood Bay, Samuel stood before the mirror, razor in hand, removing the silver stubble that had hidden him over the past several days. Each stroke sent whiskers falling into the sink like signs of a disappearance. The disappearance of the man in the worn gray sweater, revealing the sharp features that had once graced the covers of business magazines and headlined executive summits. Sun-kissed skin, a strong jawline, steady eyes. This was the face of a founder, a CEO, a man who held the future of the company in his hands. The navy blue suit, the silver gray silk tie, polished Italian leather shoes, and the familiar white gold watch, all pieces of the armor of power he had deliberately set aside yesterday. But today, Samuel needed to appear as his true self. At 7:45, he walked through the marble lobby of Harbor Street Café headquarters, the echo of his footsteps carrying across the floor, drawing glances from passing employees who slowed their pace, whispering as they looked on. Tension built as he entered the boardroom for the emergency 8 a.m. meeting, its subject line blunt: Expansion Project Review. Patricia was already there. Their eyes met, and she gave him a small, knowing nod. One by one, the others arrived: Robert, the CFO, Linda, head of operations, James, VP of marketing, and finally William, the chairman of the board. Each greeted Samuel with respect tinged with curiosity. Right on time, the large screen flickered to life, connecting to the regional office. Victoria and Derek appeared, still wearing their professional smiles and brimming with confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Victoria began smoothly. "We're honored to join you today." Samuel returned a slight nod, then opened the leather briefcase in front of him. "I'd like to start by discussing the evaluation of Store 412 from yesterday," he said, his voice deep and deliberate, each word measured. Derek jumped in quickly. "Of course, sir, everything went exceptionally well." Samuel paused for a beat, then placed a printed still from the security cameras on the table, an image of Victoria and Derek standing at his table in the café, faces tight with irritation, mid-sentence. The mood in the room shifted instantly. On screen, their eyes faltered for just a moment. "I'd like to know more about this moment," Samuel said, his tone even but cold. He laid out more photos, each capturing fragments of the exchange, the looks of disdain, the gestures dismissing him arranged in a precise line. We can explain," Victoria began, her voice wavering. Samuel didn't give them the chance. "I was at store 412 yesterday. I bought a $2 egg sandwich and sat there, observing. I heard how you spoke to a customer, me, and to the staff. Then I sat here and listened to you tell the board an entirely different story." He pressed a button on the table, and the recording played. "Customers like that drag the brand down." Derek's voice clear, cold. Then Victoria's. "Low-value customers dilute the brand image." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. Samuel switched off the audio, looking straight at the screen. "The $260 million expansion the board approved yesterday, based on this report, is canceled, effective immediately." Victoria and Derek's faces drained of color. William opened his mouth to speak, but Samuel cut him off. "We will not export dishonesty and cruelty to 3 other continents, not when we haven't even faced the truth in our own backyard." For a few seconds, it was as if everyone in the boardroom forgot how to breathe. Robert, the CFO, furrowed his brow in concern, while Linda, the head of operations, shifted slightly in her seat as though trying to avoid the heavy tension pressing down on the room. On the screen, Victoria and Derek were frozen in place. The confidence they had displayed at the start was gone, replaced by uncertainty and a hint of desperation. "Mr. Carter," Victoria tried to regain her voice, but it came out as little more than a whisper. We've been under immense pressure to maintain standards." Samuel leaned forward, his gaze cold and sharp as a spear. "Standards? You call insulting customers, belittling employees, and deceiving the board of directors a standard?" His voice tightened, each word striking the table like a hammer blow. He straightened, his shadow stretching across the polished wooden surface. "Ms. Hale, Mr. Mills, your contracts are terminated immediately. Ethical violations and falsifying reports. The legal department will provide details. Your building access is revoked as of today." Derek's mouth fell open, his voice breaking. "You can't do that. We have a clause. Any contractual protection is void in the case of gross ethical misconduct. Ask a lawyer if you don't believe me," Samuel cut in, not allowing him another word. He pressed a button on his phone. "Security, escort Ms. Hale and Mr. Mills out of the regional office. Lock their system access immediately." On the other end, the reply was short and firm. "Understood, sir." Around the table, board members exchanged glances that were part shock, part caution. But Samuel didn't stop at handing down punishment. He turned to Patricia. "I want you to contact Emily Nguyen at Store 412 immediately. Promote her to assistant manager with full benefits and health coverage effective today." Patricia nodded, jotting it down while a faint smile crossed her face. "And Linda," Samuel addressed the head of operations, "set up a meeting with store manager Linda Tran. If she's complicit in this toxic culture, we replace her. If she's just been under pressure from above, we retrain and support her from the ground up." His tone softened slightly, but his resolve was unshaken. We're not just tearing down what's wrong, we're building back what's right. Robert cleared his throat. And the expansion investment, sir? We've made commitments to partners. Samuel turned to him, his expression calm but resolute. We'll pause all of it until we've carried out a full ethical overhaul. Before adding a single new location, I want to be certain that all 820 existing stores treat people the right way. He looked around the room, letting the weight of his words settle over each person. I'd rather have fewer locations and keep our dignity than double in size and lose the soul of this company. Linda, the head of operations, sat up straight, her eyes brightening as she listened to Samuel. In that case, what's the expected timeline for this plan, sir? Samuel walked slowly around the table, his voice no longer sharp but carrying the weight of a promise. 6 months for a complete review, anonymous surveys for all employees, a thorough check of benefits policies, a reevaluation of scheduling practices, and a full reassessment of management training programs. Another 6 months to implement the improvements. Only then will we consider expansion. James, the vice president of marketing, frowned slightly. How will the media react when they learn we've canceled the largest expansion project in the company's history? Samuel stopped and turned to face him. We won't hide from it. This afternoon, I'll hold a press conference. I'll make it clear. Harbor Street Café has identified serious problems in its management system, and we are choosing to fix them rather than ignore them in the pursuit of growth. He emphasized each word. We will make Emily's story proof that we put people before profit. Patricia smiled faintly, her eyes carrying a hint of pride. That message could change the way this entire industry thinks about expansion and leadership. Samuel nodded. We're going to do it for real, not for show. For the next hour, Samuel outlined the new roadmap, establishing a hotline for reporting managerial misconduct, requiring all managers to complete empathy training, and revising the bonus system so it isn't based solely on revenue, but also tied to employee satisfaction. Every proposal was carefully recorded, not a single detail left out. When the meeting ended, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a genuine pride in the direction the company was heading. That afternoon, in front of dozens of reporters, Samuel told the story of the $2 egg sandwich that changed everything. The press quickly gave it a name, the $2 Revolution. Just 48 hours later, Harbor Street Café's stock price didn't drop, it rose, as investors recognized the long-term value of ethical business. But for Samuel, the most important moment came 3 days later, when an envelope appeared on his desk. Inside was a card written in small, neat handwriting. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. This is what true leadership should be. Signed, Emily Nguyen. Samuel kept that card in the corner of his desk as a reminder that sometimes a glass of water and a sincere smile can spark a change far greater than any expansion plan. After the press conference that made waves, Samuel thought he would have a few quiet days to begin the first steps of reform, but reality proved otherwise. Emails poured in from every direction, from longtime employees of Harbor Street Café, loyal customers, and even complete strangers moved by the story. Some sent notes of gratitude, sharing positive experiences with the brand, while others spoke up boldly, recounting negative encounters they had faced. Samuel spent his first 2 evenings reading every single word. There were letters from cafes in distant states where employees still had to work 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and emails from customers who had witnessed staff being scolded publicly. Each story was a fragment, and when pieced together, Samuel could see the true picture of his company, not rotten, but far from as flawless as the reports had painted. Patricia became an indispensable right hand during this period. Together, they formed the People First Task Force, made up of trusted mid-level managers and carefully selected frontline employees. Their mission was to visit every store, speak candidly with staff, document every issue, and propose practical solutions. Gone were the staged inspections. With carefully arranged paperwork, everything would happen unannounced and in full transparency. On the 5th day after the press conference, Samuel unexpectedly received a video call from Emily. On the screen, she wore a crisp new shirt and a gleaming name tag that read, Assistant Manager. The shyness she once had was now replaced by confidence. tinged with emotion. "I just wanted to say, I won't let you down," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Samuel smiled. "You don't need to promise me anything, Emily. Just keep treating people the way you always have, with kindness, fairness, and sincerity. The rest will follow on its own." But Samuel also knew the road ahead would not be all smooth. The decision to cancel the expansion had left some major shareholders dissatisfied, and rumors of internal conflict began appearing on financial forums. Still, he remained unfazed. He understood that any real change would always cause disruption. The question was whether one had the resolve to see it through to the end. One evening, as Samuel stood by his office window looking down at the rush of people under the glow of streetlights, a thought struck him. The $2 revolution had only just begun. And if he did it right, it wouldn't just change Harbor Street Café, it might just be the spark that made the entire service industry take a hard look at itself. Pressure from major shareholders surfaced quickly. Just 1 week after Samuel announced the reform plan, a group of institutional investors sent a letter requesting a detailed explanation for the cancellation of the $260 million expansion project. The wording of the letter was polite, but the underlying message was clear. They were concerned that the company's stock value could drop if it failed to continue growing as planned. Samuel read the letter and set it down on his desk, not rushing to respond. He knew that relying solely on moral reasoning would be difficult to persuade those who were accustomed to seeing the world only through profit figures. He needed a strategy that would make them understand that people and profit were not opposing concepts, but ones that could reinforce each other. Patricia proposed a closed-door meeting between the executive team and the key shareholders. "Let them see the real numbers, but numbers that reflect long-term value," she said. Samuel agreed. In the days that followed, the People First Task Force was mobilized to collect data on employee turnover rates, retraining costs, employee satisfaction scores, and the direct link between these factors and revenue. When the meeting took place, Samuel did not begin with a rousing speech, but instead displayed a simple chart. In stores where employee satisfaction scored above 85%, average revenue was 23% higher than the company-wide baseline, and personnel costs were 19% lower due to reduced turnover. He then told the story of Emily not as an isolated case, but as a representative example of hundreds of other employees who could thrive if given empowerment and respect. The atmosphere in the room gradually shifted. Eyes that had initially been skeptical now turned attentive. One major shareholder, known for his hard-nosed stance, slowly nodded. "If these numbers are accurate, then your strategy isn't just about ethics, it's a smart investment." Samuel gave a faint smile, knowing he had planted the first seed. But he also understood that this was only the beginning of a long-term battle to prove that People First was not just a slogan, but the operational foundation of the entire corporation. From the perspective of someone who has experienced both million-dollar negotiations and simple conversations over a coffee counter, Samuel Carter has proven something the business world often forgets. Profit and humanity are not mutually exclusive. A company is only truly strong when financial gains are built on a foundation of respect for and support of its people. Kindness not only improves internal culture, but also creates long-term, sustainable value, something no financial report can fully capture. If you believe that every business decision should start with people, hit like and subscribe to help spread inspiring stories like this one. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words, "Keep people," as a reminder that in any circumstance, people will always be the most valuable asset.